Well, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. It's great to have you on this session. Short and sweet, we'll keep it to half an hour. I'm delighted to have my co-host, Helen Slinger, Executive Director at A4S, and Scott Matter, CIO at PIMCO. I will introduce our next guest as soon as he's arrives. But in the meantime, a little bit about myself. So I head our Sustainable Finance Program at the UN Global Compact. I'm Morice. The UN Global Compact has been working with the Prince's Accounting for Sustainability project, known as A4S. I think most of you joining us will already know about this incredible organization since the inception of our work at the Compact on Sustainable Finance. So we're here to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing with CFOs specifically. And the key focus for us is to build the capacity of companies and investors. So that's why today we're lucky to have a company and an investor. So we'll hear the sort of perspective of both Mark Kaye, CFO at Moody's Global Credit Rating Agency, as well as I've just mentioned Scott Matter, who head CIO, so the sort of Chief Investment Officer of the global investment firm. So Mark, welcome, and Scott too. We're delighted to have you on board. We're going to be asking you a couple of questions. Helen will be moderating, but before we do that, I just want to kind of share with our audience 2 or 3 kind of key points just really to set up the scenes. So we're here to talk, just to make sure that you all know that you're at the right session. We're here to talk about CFOs, the role that they play specifically, and the SDGs, and of course, we're sort of bringing investors at the table as well. So in terms of setting up the scenes, so if we want to achieve the actual SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, it's been estimated that we have a financial gap of between $3 to $5 trillion a year, and that's just in developing economies alone. So substantial gap, not impossible to fill in, but let's talk a little bit about the kind of strategy that we can play and how we can actually sort of get corporates and companies to activate this financing of the SDGs. The UN Global Compact, as part of the sustainable finance kind of work that we're doing, has set up CFO Taskforce for the SDGs to really kind of convey CFOs together and bring them at the forefront of this agenda. So what we're going to be exploring today is the role of the private sector and of CFOs, particularly in mainstreaming sustainable investments. I can see Mark nodding, but obviously the role of rating agencies in analyzing the credit risks corporate sectors face as a result of transitioning towards the SDGs. And of course, sort of bringing Scott as well to the table around what institutional investors can actually do to support the SDG agenda implementation and the contribution specifically of that sector. So I think we're hopefully clear on what we're going to be covering. Looking forward to this conversation. Handing over to Helen now for the discussion of our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. And it's great to be working with you in this important area. Delighted to co-host this panel with you and really pleased that we've been able to get representatives from both the A4S CFO Leadership Network and from the UN Global Compact CFO Taskforce for the SDGs. So Mark, great to have you here with us today. I'm going to start with a couple of questions for you, if I may.
Of course, Helen and Marie, thanks very much as well for having me with you today.
Great. So as CFO of Moody's, you can obviously appreciate that rating agencies have a really key role to play in addressing the SDG financing gap that Mary just referred to. So it'd be great to hear how are Moody's integrating the SDGs into your credit rating analysis?
So we certainly see SDGs as an important contributor to the broad movement underway within the capital markets to incorporate sustainable or ESG principles into the investment decision process. Moody's Investor Service, or MIS's role, is really to assess credit risk, and we incorporate sustainability issues into our ratings. One could really ask, how do ESG SDGs or broader sustainability issues impact the credit risk of a rated entity? And the answer there is that we recognize that there is market demand for the rating agencies to transparently and systematically demonstrate how we are incorporating those ESG factors into our credit ratings and research. To do that, MIS has adopted an approach with, I call it 4 primary components for integrating ESG into our credit ratings. First, MIS has created a classification system that defines the ESG risks and opportunities we believe to be the most material to credit. On average, there are about 5 subcategories in that classification for each of the E, S, and G, and we focus on those in our analysis. The point of this classification system is that it encompasses a number of areas that the SDGs themselves focus on, such as climate and water risk, energy transition, income and racial inequality, board diversity, and, for example, institutional strength. Second, MIS uses heat maps to assess the inherent exposure and credibility of the ES factors at the sector level, and we do this for over 80 globally rated sectors. And that helps us ensure consistency among the rating groups in identifying ESG risks and their influence on credit ratings by sector. Third, we have developed issuer-specific assessment tools to help us evaluate issuer-level risk at the ESG level. And then these are the new issuer profile scores that we introduced for market comment back in September. We're hoping that are going to launch soon, starting with the sovereign ratings. And then lastly is the integration of the assessment of these risks and the materiality of the credit impacts in MIS's rating committees. And by providing this level of insight and transparency, we're hoping to give market participants a clear understanding of how much sustainability issues, such as those the SDGs focus on, are assessed as part of our analysis and how they then impact various credit ratings.
Thank you. So do you get a sense with those measures that you've put in place and how you communicate those out to market participants, do you get a sense of, to what extent are they actually supporting investment in the SDGs?
Yeah, there is a fair amount of overlap between SDGs and the elements of ESG that we think is most likely to influence credit ratings. MIS's ESG classification system and the new ESG scores that we're introducing in 2021 really focus on how much an issue is exposed to or how much they're taking advantage of ESG issues that could influence its credit ratings. And the ESG areas we focus on for overlap. I thought I'd give a couple of examples here. First, we assess an entity's exposure, for example, to the transition to clean energy, which is aligned with I think, SDG goal number 7. So we ask ourselves, does the transition represent a material risk or opportunity to the entity? How is that entity responding? Does that weaken or strengthen that entity's credit profile? Similarly, we could assess an entity's exposure to the risks of physical climate change and the responses it's taking to adapt or mitigate. And that would align, for example, with SDG goal number 13, which is focused on climate action. So we looked at what the credit implications are for the exposure and then the rated responses. Maybe one last example, and this one's personally important to me, is that we assess the quality of a country's education system or its level of inequality. And I come from South Africa, so it's very relevant. And we assess that in terms of the credit risk or strength for that country. And those issues are also very aligned with the SDG goals, for example, I think number 4, 5, and 10. And by transparently analyzing the relative areas of weakness or strength with respect to these ESG issues and how they may impact the credit rating of the entity, we reinforce the fact that many of the issues the SDGs focus on are important from a credit rating perspective. For those of you who are interested, we did publish some research earlier this year that makes this point. We noted that ESG factors were material in about 50% of public sector ratings from January 19 through March 20, and in about 1/3 of our private sector ratings in 2019.
Thank you. And presumably that research is available on your website.
Correct.
Fantastic, thank you. So more specifically, just thinking about your role as CFO, because of course you are a member of the A4S CFO Leadership Network. what is it that CFOs are uniquely positioned to do to accelerate achievement of the SDGs?
And Helen, thank you very much for asking. So CFOs are uniquely positioned, and I want to stress those words because I think they're important, to help with the alignment of SDG goals within the organization. Also because we have a fairly large say in influencing our corporate investments, and because we drive companies' resources to projects and investments that support the SDG goals and expand the use of financial instruments to further sustainable development. It's very important that we aim to translate ambitious commitments into real, tangible corporate investments so that we can adapt our business models and so that we can enable long-term corporate strategies that maximize how we as companies impact SDGs. At Moody's, we align our corporate sustainability strategies with the SDGs, and we continue to expand the establishment of specific goals and metrics to measure our progress. We are also very active participants and contributors in working groups that aim to transform finance, such as the CFO Taskforce for SDGs, something we're very proud of internally. Mm-hmm. And at Moody specifically, there are 9 SDGs that we actively contribute to. And I'll mention maybe just a few here. For example, goal number 9 on industry, innovation and infrastructure. In 2019 and 2020, we increasingly invested in the acquisitions of 427, which is a climate risk data firm that measures the physical risks of climate change. We also invested in VE, which is an international provider of ESG research and services for investors and organizations. And these strategic acquisitions enable Moody's not only to expand the products and services we offer, but also to integrate ESG considerations into our legacy products and services. Another example could be SDG goal number 13 around climate action. And in 2020, we publicly committed to what I consider pretty ambitious goals, including reducing our greenhouse gas emissions from operations and value chain in line with science-based targets. We procured 100% renewable energy in our global operations starting this year. And we achieved carbon neutrality for our annual resident emissions from operations, business travel, employee commuting, etc., from the time we went public in 2000 through today. So things that we're very proud of. Internally, we also focus on gender equality, which is SDG goal number 5. And we contribute to this through a number of programs that improve the representation of women in our workforce, as well as empowering women in communities that we operate in. One that I always like to talk about is what I call the Reignite program. And that's a paid, for example, 10-week return to work program that we have in the US and Europe, Middle East, and Africa, or EMEA, that's really designed to support individuals, especially women and mothers who are wishing to restart their careers after a minimum 2-year break. And since we started that program in 2017, we've proudly converted about 75% of participants to Moody's employees.
So in summary, there's a lot that CFOs can do, particularly through a lot of the investments that you can choose to make. Fantastic. Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. So just coming to you, Scott, and moving to the wider financial system. So, why are the SDGs relevant to institutional investors, and how are you integrating ESG into your portfolio management at PIMCO?
I think it's always worth remembering that sustainability is really just about, at least from the financial perspective, really about making growth as big as it can be, as inclusive as it can be, and as resilient. And so it's increasingly clear to institutional investors and to retail investors that the path of development that we were on cannot simply be sustained, or if it is, we're going to have a lot of economic challenges and a lot more pain than we need to have. So the financial markets have a way of pulling the future into today. As soon as they start to realize these issues and problems developing, they start pricing it into financial assets as they should do. And so it's increasingly clear as the number of challenges keep rising, and as they get closer and closer into view, and we see them unfolding around us and really starting to shape financial markets, different pieces of the market are already changing pretty substantially, that they have to incorporate sustainability research and factors into their analysis. And if they're not doing that, then they're basically, turning a blind eye to what is very material in terms of future performance. So, why the SDGs? I usually describe the SDGs as, look, there's many different languages of sustainability, and that's great, and many people speak them all. But the SDGs are really the global language of sustainability from our perspective. And that's because they resonate with virtually everyone. It's the language that increasingly policymakers, governments, and investors use around the world. And so that's why we're adopting it and saying that's really the best way for companies to align their sustainability efforts is with the SDGs, because it is that global language. And we think that's really helpful for investors, that sort of marketplace development. Just, that's the standardization, if you will, that the marketplace sort of needs, and that really investors like ourselves are looking for. Now, how do we do that in our portfolios? Well, we've taken the approach of having this integrated research platform. We have large analyst teams, and essentially, yes, we consume all the outside data that we can from Moody's and others, and ultimately we come up with our own opinions, our own ratings, if you will. And that's how we can assure consistency across everything we do. And it's also how we can provide the best advice to clients. And so with this sustainability or ESG platform that we have, we can design products, we can design portfolios for them based on their objectives and the trajectories that they want to be on. So that's how we approach it.
Great. So, I mean, historically, there used to be an underlying assumption that, investing with SDG in mind led to a reduction in returns. But that point of view is being eroded. And indeed, there's quite compelling evidence to the contrary. How do you see this changing the financial system? How quickly do you see this becoming mainstream? And how can that impact progress towards the SDGs?
Yep, it's a great observation and question. I usually, at least acknowledge that there's, as with everything in investing, there's ways to use data incorrectly, and there's ways to make mistakes. And it's no different with respect to materially important sustainability factors. But most of the academic studies would show you that by increasing your understanding of those risks and those opportunities, you can improve performance. Done in a sensible way, it certainly does nothing to detract, and many studies would show it definitely improves risk-adjusted returns. So that data is out there, that information is out there. So that's why, one of the big reasons you've seen this tremendous growth in investors just acknowledging the importance of it, and so much research activity now being devoted to it. People understand it makes sense today to do that. It'll make even more sense as we move through time and these factors become more and more material. Some of the biggest challenges that we face, whether it's climate change or biodiversity loss or the massive inequalities that have emerged, people just have a sense. They know these issues are going to be driving economies and driving, therefore, businesses and financial market returns. So I think that's the big shift you've seen. And that's why when we look at our investor base and you look at really any of the surveys that are out there, you see double-digit increases in year-on-year increases in people's interest in different sectors. It doesn't matter what you're really surveying them, what particular topic you're surveying them about, but they are definitely making the move. And I would suppose, several years from now, it will be just considered mainstream. And that's it, just be incorporated into everybody's analysis and into people's standard way of approaching research.
And how quickly do you think that can happen then? You say it will become mainstream. What's your sense of how long that will take? Can we do it quickly? Personally, I don't think it's going to take that long. I would say, 3 to 5 years, you could consider it pretty much mainstream, where it's something that everyone's doing. Great, thank you. And I guess thinking of your role that you have with UNGC on the task force, what do you think are the key strategic benefits of integrating SDGs into business models and into financial models?
Well, I think that, the key benefit is it's good business. Increasingly stakeholders care about it, all versions of them. Business, their customers care about it, their employees increasingly care about it, their investors care about it. So it is just good business. To be a leader in your industry, to make sure you're not falling behind, if you will, in terms of how you think about addressing sustainability risks and opportunities is a big strategic advantage. And so, we're quite convinced that for people who take that step and commit to that journey and continuing to explore ways to improve both their performance on material sustainability factors, but also to lead the industry, that it puts them to a significant strategic advantage. And so it's good business, and that's why we think there's so many companies we see leaders in their fields joining initiatives like the task force.
Fantastic, thank you. So earlier today, we heard from Ban Ki-moon at our opening session. And one of the things that he shared, and one of the things he said was, there are 17 goals. They're all interconnected, and we can't neglect even one of these goals. So question for both of you, really. I don't mind which of you wants to go first, but my question is just sort of reflecting on that. We often see companies that focus their efforts on, a handful of SDGs. Is that the right thing to do? Is it about materiality and focus on the things you can really impact? Or is that just a way of cherry picking? And actually Ban Ki-moon's point about they're all being interconnected and we can't neglect any of them should actually take precedent. Maybe Mark, I'll jump to you for that question to start with.
Sure, Helen, and I appreciate your integrating his remarks into this discussion. I'll talk a little bit about sort of the journey that we've been on, and that's really about finding, at least initially, that subset of those 17 SDGs that best align with what I would perceive and what our executive leadership team perceives as our organization's strengths and where we think we can contribute most meaningfully to SDG advancement and development. As a set of goals or a set of goals, targets, indicators, we can then use to promote sort of that credible measurement of progress and output. Second, I would say that organizations can translate the contributions to SDGs into strategic objectives and initiatives that are then integrated with the corporate strategy. And obviously, corporate strategy is not everything. It's as important to work out what you will do as what you will not do. And then how you tie back that subset, at least on our own personal experience, to that corporate strategy and evaluating then the specific resource and funding needs that are necessary to implement them and to adopt investment and decision-making progress based on the impact that you can have and the impact that those SDGs can then have across the broader universe. Third, I would say that the full range of financial instruments can be leveraged to raise SDGs linkage to finance. So in my mind, I'm thinking everything from green bonds, social bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, SDG-linked bonds, etc. And fourth and finally, I'd say that integrated reporting practices that consider both the financial aspects and the contribution to SDGs, as well as the accuracy, and this is probably something that I wanted to re-emphasize, the accuracy of the reporting efforts is going to be very important as we continue down this journey. And so I'd encourage all listeners on the call today to really join the existing task forces that aim to create a more combined, consistent, comparable development of the SDGs as we shape sort of the 2030 agenda, such as, for example, the CFO Taskforce for SDGs that we've been speaking about.
Thank you, Mark. And Scott, did you have a view?
Yeah, I think a similar view. We take sort of a pragmatic view and do acknowledge definitely that all the SDGs are interconnected, and you really can't move one without changing something in other categories, if you will. But it's definitely, our view that some factors, some SDGs are more relevant to certain industries as being the key drivers of how they're influencing the others. And so, yeah, in a perfect world, companies would be able to describe their performance and their goals with respect to all 17 SDGs. But practically speaking, from where we are today, we know that's not possible. So we're just encouraging people to don't, it can be very difficult if you start with the idea that you need to be perfect with respect to reporting on all 17 SDGs. So we take the view that the most important thing is to continue to build upon both one, your reporting and the metrics and how you describe the business and how you understand how your business is relating to the SDGs. But don't let perfection be the enemy of the good here. And the most important step is the first step, if you will. And then you can build upon that. And that's what we see many companies doing. Some of the real leaders out there, you look at where they were two or 3 years ago, and you look at where they are today. Yeah. It's a much deeper, richer set of disclosures, and they understand their own business risks and challenges much better because of it. So that's the journey that we like to see companies on.
So don't wait until you've got perfection, but start now.
Yes.
Thank you. We've probably got 1 minute to hear from each of you in terms of your key takeaways. You know, what would you like to leave the listeners with in terms of tangible steps they can take to integrate the SDGs into their financing and financial decision making? Scott, maybe we'll hear from you first.
Yeah, I think as with what Mark said, I mean, one of the great ways is for companies to join the task forces like the UNGC Taskforce for the SDGs. Because really, this is a group of peers designed to, learn quickly from one another. This is, a lot of these risks, a lot are unknown, a lot will emerge over time, but there's a lot that we can be learning from one another to get together now. And so, I think that's one of the great ways is just become engaged in these networks. I think what you'll see emerge is basically a set of companies where they can serve as templates, if you will, for how to approach some of these issues that people are encountering, how to understand their business better, how to describe the path with respect to sustainability. And if we can get businesses of all sizes, all geographies and all industries involved, then it will allow, especially small and medium-sized businesses, which don't have all the resources that the large companies have, but they'll be able to look out there and say, okay, well, that business looks a little bit like mine, and I see how they've approached this challenge. I can do that too. And so that's I think one of the big wins that will occur from companies engaging through these networks.
Great, thank you. And Mark?
I was going to say everything Scott said is spot on. Maybe just a small add, pick an area that you feel and your culture feel passionately about. So for Moodys, for at least over this last year and a bit, we felt very passionate as a company and as a culture around both social capital, sort of the human rights, data access, data security, data privacy, customer welfare, and very passionate about the environment, greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, energy management. And I think that passion has allowed us to move forward much, much more quickly than we would otherwise have done.
Indeed, I would agree with that. Thank you to both of our speakers. That's been fantastic. It's been very quick. So thank you for being so speedy with your responses, but so comprehensive. Mary, if I just hand over back to you to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you, Mark, and thanks, Scott. I think the message is loud and clear, so I'm not going to repeat everything, just kind of, I think passion definitely kind of came out, as well as, sort of start somewhere. So definitely get on the journey and perhaps join the CFO Taskforce. We'd love to have you at the table in partnerships with A4S. 2 or 3 things that I wanted to kind of flag specifically that will be available on the content hub of this sort of A4S summit. So 2 A4S briefings. So one called Briefing for Finance on the SDGs. So I think highly relevant for anyone who's been joining us today, as well as A4S Financing our future report. So a great sort of way to look at how to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement specifically. And the principles that have been developed, the CFO principles developed by the CFO Taskforce, will also be available there. So I think everything will be very much there on the hub, practical, tangible things for you to hopefully start your journey. So I think that's really all we have time for today, but thank you for joining us. Looking forward to more conversation, and do join us at the task force, and looking forward to more of this. Thank you.